Greetings and welcome to our daily walk through the scripture for September the 27th. Your readings today find you in Isaiah chapters 54, 55, 56, and Isaiah 57 verses 1 through 14. Ephesians chapter 6 is your reading, and also Psalm chapter 71 through 5 and Proverbs chapter 24 verse 8. In the Old Testament, all the way back in Genesis, you see Adam naming animals. And he does so because back then in the Near East, giving a name to something meant that you had authority over that something. And that's the same thing with parenting. Parenting, if you name your child in those views, you have automatic authority over those children. Now, what is significant about that is that if you go back and you look at the accounting in Genesis, you will notice that Eve doesn't actually have a name at the beginning. She is just referred to as woman, the woman. She is not referred to by any kind of name. She wasn't referred to anything like that in Genesis 1, Genesis 2, Genesis 3, the woman, the woman, the woman, the woman, the woman, okay? All right. Then, after the sin, she gets a name. In other words, what was once a beautiful partnership, a complementarian partnership, has now become one of dominant authority. Adam is exerting his dominance over his wife. This was a part of the curse that God placed because of their sin. Actually, let's be clear. God didn't create the curse. The curse fell on them because of their choices. It was the effect of it. It was the result of it. Now, why do I bring this up? Because that curse carries over all the way into Ephesians chapter 5 and 6. Now, we didn't talk about the wives and husbands conversation of Ephesians chapter 5, but if you look at it, it has that same problem that was all the way back in Genesis chapter 3 with the fall, because when that happened, suddenly the male and female relationship became more hierarchical. It wasn't the biblical hierarchical. Paul is attempting to try to create that biblical hierarchy, but the reality of it is that husbands, we have an issue of dominating if we're not careful. And it can not only affect our wives, but it can also affect our children. That's the reason why in chapter 6, verse 4, it says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger." We have a tendency, if we're not careful, to dominate everything around us. This has been a problem since Adam, and it's going to continue to be a problem until the day that Jesus comes and we all get to spend eternity with him. As a result of that, we have to make sure that we check our heart. Men especially, we have to make sure that we are looking and treating our spouses, our children, with love, honor, and respect. Not trying to dominate them, but instead trying to serve them. That's what Paul was talking about in 5 at the end of it. Love your wives as Christ loved the church, sacrificially, wholeheartedly, not seeking to dominate, but with grace and truth and love. Fathers, treat your children the same way. Obey your parents in the Lord, children. Pay attention to what your father says. He talks about wives. Hey, make sure that you're serving and loving your husband as well. Children, make sure that you're serving and loving one another as well. Children, we have an issue of, hey, you're not the boss of me. We'd like to do those things, but we are told that this is a commandment that continues. Honor your father and mother. And Paul says this is the first commandment with a promise, which, by the way, the promise is that it may go well with you. But ultimately, what is talking about here, and then Paul transitions to the bondservants and the masters. What Paul is talking about here this whole time is being servants to one another. This is contrary to our natural desire. We want to elevate ourselves, and we do want to elevate ourselves above others. Why? This is just what we want to do. We want to prove our worth. We want to show it. This is the sinful human aspect of us. And Paul here is trying to tell us we've got to fight against this tendency that's been going on all the way since back in the beginning of Genesis. We got to fight to dominate one another, fight from dominating one another, instead become the servant that Christ is. Serve with one another with a sincere heart, just as you would serve Christ, which is what he says to bondservants. But that applies to all of us. I mean, you look at it here. Fathers, bring them up in instruction of the Lord. Fathers, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Wives, submit and serve your husband. Children, obey. This is a mutual servanthood. This is a mutual submission to one another and a love for one another. And frankly, that's something that's very hard for us to do, contrary to it. So be encouraged. Let's strive forward. Let's continue to try to serve and love and sacrifice for one another rather than dominate. All right, that's it for today. We'll talk more next time.